Thank you very much. So, who has heard about homomorphic encryption? Yeah, quite a few, yeah. And who has actually used it or played with it? Not much. Okay. So I hope this will be helpful. Yes, so a few words about me. I've been working on homomorphic encryption for the past 5 years. First in a lab at EPFL, then in a private company. And finally, I'm back in a lab at Gauss Labs to do research. If you have played with homomorphic encryption, you might be aware of the Lative library. I'm one of the co-authors. I'm also an FHE contributor, and since I like so much FHE, every year I participate to a competition where you use FHE to do private genomic analysis, IDASH, and I've been among the winners every year. Brief overview of what we are going to see. I will do, of course, an introduction and some history about FHE. Then we will see the ring LWE construction, which is the main hard problem on which all current FHE schemes are based. Then we see how FHE works with standard security. Then we will go about a new security model that was developed to fix some issues, and then how we can make FHE comply to this security model, and if the time allows it, if we can go beyond this security model with FHE. So some history. First, what is FHE? Well, it's a type of encryption that allows you to evaluate an arbitrary function on a ciphertext without knowing the secret key. So it's a very powerful tool because basically what you can do is outsource computation to a server, while preserving the privacy of the inputs. But you can also do much more interesting things when you start to having multiple parties that have secret inputs. And it's quite a hot topic at the moment because of all this rush for privacy enhancing technologies. And one question that we have is eventually can it be considered as a reasonable and appropriate measure by privacy law and in a sense become mandatory? So in a nutshell, homomorphic encryption is an algorithm where you have, of course, a way to, generate a secret key, a public key, and some evaluation keys that are needed for the evaluation phase. An encryption algorithm, an evaluation algorithm that takes a function, the evaluation keys, and a ciphertext, and outputs a new ciphertext that encrypts the message on which the function was applied, and a decryption algorithm. So the function is a map from the message space to message space, and the evaluation provides a map from the ciphertext space to a ciphertext space. And the encryption and decryption algorithm are actually homomorphics between the message space and the ciphertext space. More concretely, we can have a diagram, a commutative diagram, where all these algorithms map either from the message space to a ciphertext space or to an encryption of the message or a function of the message. So some history. Homomorphic encryption had been theorized since the very beginning of cryptography with RSA, because this scheme was actually homomorphic with respect to multiplication. But for the first 30 years, only partially homomorphic schemes, so only one single algebraic operation, were available. So we had RSA for multiplication and, for example, Palier with homomorphic addition. It's only in 2019 that Craig Gaintree proposed the first blueprint for a truly FHE schemes, so which means 2 algebraic operations, but also you can do an unlimited number of them. But it was highly impractical. So then we had iteration on the FHE scheme, each one improving their efficiency. The first one, of course, was the blueprint of Gaintree. And then afterward, we have schemes that are called BEV and BGV, which provide encrypted arithmetic on vectors of integers. And they are still used and quite useful for things that do finite field arithmetic, like private set intersection, oblivious information retrieval, or even oblivious pseudo-random functions. Then we had the second generation, which the improvement over the first generation, where the improvement over the second generation was that operation over single values were much faster. And they are also enabled generate circuits that can be expressed with gates. And finally, the fourth generation, this time enable arithmetic over complex number, which is very practical if you want, for example, to do privacy-preserving machine learning, genome-wide association studies, or simply encrypted statistics like privacy-preserving credit scoring. And you even have very recently, like 2 months ago, instantiation that also, with this scheme, enable finite field arithmetic that are more efficient than the previous generation. So the thing is that Gantry's blueprint was very impractical. So for the past 15 years, the research was mostly focused on making it practical. And for this reason, because it was not practical, people didn't really care about making it more secure than just having the bare minimum, which is truth and plain text attacks. But it's starting to be practical now and actually used. And we are starting to see that even, again, passive adversaries, the IND-CPA model is not enough. And this is what we are going to see in this talk. So first, to understand what will be the problem, I must give some context and how this scheme are constructed. And what you have to know that all rely on the same underlying problem, which is the ring learning with error. So first, to be able to introduce this problem, I must be some math, but this is the only slide that will give some definitions. So we work in a cyclotomic polynomial ring. And you can see it as all polynomials of degree at most n-1 with coefficient taken modulo q. And yeah, that's it. We work with polynomials. And we need a few distributions, the uniform distribution, so you sample a random polynomial with uniform coefficients in your domain. A ternary distribution, it's a polynomial where you have signed binary coefficients and where you have a fixed number of non-zero coefficients. And finally, a polynomial with a discrete Gaussian distribution. That's all you need for the ring learning with error problem. So how does it work? Well, you sample a tuple of polynomials, which is a public polynomial of random values, times a secret polynomial, S, plus some noise that hides everything. And you publish this minus AS plus E and A. And you have two problems. The first one is the distinguishing problem. Given a sample, then you have to say, is it a RLB sample or is it from the uniform distribution of R? Or the third problem, which is simply, well, I give you a sample and then I ask you, please recover S or E. And informally, we say they are lambda secure if you need at least 2 to the power of lambda operation over the ring to break either problems. And lambda is a function of all these parameters, which is n, the size of the polynomial, q, the size of the modulus, h, the Hamming weight of the key, and sigma, the size of the error that you add. So how do you encrypt with this scheme? Well, you have this generator to generate the secret key, which is simply a polynomial with very small coefficients. We'll not talk about the public key, but it exists, but it's not useful for what we do. Basically, it's an encryption of 0. But you also need evaluation keys, which are encryption of the secret key, of a function of the secret key under itself. And to encrypt a message, you, basically, as you can see, it's like sampling an RLB sample and adding a message on top of it, except that you control what S is. This is your secret key. The evaluation algorithm, what it does, it preserves the homomorphism. So given a ciphertext that encrypts some message, the evaluation key and a function, it's the same thing as doing the evaluation on a ciphertext of 0 and the function separately on F, and then adding F back on top of the ciphertext. So as you can see, the structure is the same. You again have some polynomial times secret key plus your message plus some noise, except the noise did change. And the decryption is very simple. You simply do a dot product with the secret key. You take the second component, B, you multiply the secret, you add back on the first one, you see that it cancels, and you are left with your message plus some error. And if M has enough redundancy, so the way you encode it, then you can isolate the noise and remove it and recover exact M. I said all the schemes use the same blueprint for the encryption, the decryption, and the generation. The evaluation might change a little bit depending on how M is encoded, but it's not important. And the literature usually distinguishes between two categories of schemes, depending on how the encoding algorithm works. So you have the exact category, that if you encrypt and then decrypt, then you retrieve exactly the message, as long as the error is below some bound. And you have approximate schemes, where you don't have a correctness, but you retrieve a message that is very close to the original message, but it's not exactly the same. And so the CKK scheme, which does arithmetic over a complex number, is approximate. And all these other ones which do arithmetic on finite fields are exact. And we can see why it needs to be approximate, because the complex field is not, it's unbounded, it's continuous arithmetic. But they have a common things, and they all use some form of scaling to manage to encode the message and handle how they manage the noise. And we will see that, this is important. So, how does this interact with usual ciphertext indistinguishability security standard? I will briefly go over the IND-CPA standard, which is defined as a game between an adversary and a challenger. And basically the game is very simple. The challenger runs the generation algorithm. He sends the public key to the adversary and samples a bit B, 1 or 0. Then the adversary gets the public key, can do whatever he wants with it locally, generates 2 messages, and he sends back the message to the challenger. The challenger encrypts one of the messages depending on the bit that was sampled, sends back to A, and A now has to guess which message was encrypted. And basically the scheme is secure, IND-CPA secure if the best strategy for the adversary is to guess randomly. So in other words, one IND-CPA security state is that ciphertexts are indistinguishable from random noise, regardless of what the adversary chooses for a message. So we have seen that RLB samples are, if they are lambda secure, then they are indistinguishable from a random distribution in the domain of the ciphertext. So then this means that plain RLB encryption should be also IND-CPA secure. Because if you add a message to something that is random, you get something that is random. So the issue is that the notion of IND-CPA security only encompasses the generation, the encryption, and the decryption. Sorry, there is a typo, but not the decryption. And in a way, it's a model that is supposed to protect against a passive adversary. So it's an adversary that has to follow protocol, but he can try to infer as much as possible from what he sees. Then, more than IND-CPA, we have IND-CCA1, which is the same as IND-CPA, but this time the adversary can query a decryption oracle before getting the challenge. So clearly, RLB encryption is not IND-CCA secure, because the adversary could query the decryption on the evaluation key and get back the secret key. And even stronger, then we have IND-CCA2, where the adversary has access to a decryption oracle before and after the challenge. And there is an impossibility result. No FHE scheme can be IND-CCA2 secure because it implies non-malleability, which is what you want with an FHE scheme. So for a long time, it was so that IND-CPA security was sufficient to protect against passive adversary, and it was the standard model for FHE. But in 2021, Lee and Michel they showed that it's not sufficient if you have 2 conditions that are reunited. The first one is that you don't have a correctness property. And the second one is that you publicly disclose decryption results. And this is the case of many applications of the CKK scheme, which is approximate. So how does the attack work? Well, it's very simple. Let's say you have a CKK ciphertext that encrypts the message. Well, if an adversary gets the decryption, which is message plus the error, and knows the ciphertext, then he can recover the secret key by solving a linear equation. So in practice, it can be a bit more tricky because I knows the row invertible, and you can have some floating point error in the encoding and decoding algorithm. But all these issues, there are workarounds, and the attack works in polynomial times. So here we have an issue where we have a scheme that is probably IND-CPA secure, but it's not actually secure against passive adversary. And the main issue is that IND-CPA assumes that the scheme is exact. So to encompass this lack, Lee and Michel they propose a new security notion, which is IND-CPA D-security. And this is supposed to take the ability of the adversary to get access of decryptions of plaintext it already knows. So the adversary does not get more power than an IND-CPA adversary, because if the scheme is exact, then he learns nothing but knowing, getting decryption of plaintext he already knows. Here is a small diagram of how they all interact with each other. And the arrow means that if an arrow goes somewhere, it's on the right, it means it's stronger and it implies the previous one. And we also relax it to Q-in-CPAD, which means that you are in CPAD as long as you can support up to 2 queries. So, of course, this was kind of shocking the community. Well, everybody knew about this in a way because the attack is very simple, so we knew this was an issue. But the thing is, for the people that are not in the community, and another issue is that the CKK scheme was, by design, the only approximate scheme. So, as such, a lot of people interpreted this paper as an attack specifically targeted at the CKK schemes. And for a few years, it was singled out as an insecure scheme. And we even had some actors that use this as a sales argument for their product, saying, we use exact scheme, so we are secure. But were they actually correct? So exact FHA scheme actually in CPAD secure? Well, of course, not really. And there was a misconception, is that exact schemes are not really exact. They are only exact up to a certain point. And this means that they can tolerate some error during the computation, but up to only a certain point. But also, they also have a non-zero probability of correctness error when you decrypt. And the adversary can use honestly the evaluator to break the correctness and render the exact scheme approximate. So these attacks are computers in the works. And both works show as efficient key recovery attacks against all the previously schemes that were deemed to be exact. So the attack is very simple. In the exact scheme, you have a message times some scaling factor, and as long as when you decrypt the error is smaller than some bound, then you can get the message. But if you use the evaluator to just scale a message high enough, which will also scale the error, then you can generate a valid ciphertext, but that does not correctly decrypt. And the adversary can either use that to move the bits of the error into the message space, which allow him to recover the error and then recover the secret key, or do a binary search on E. And this also is an issue even if you don't use the evaluator, but just try to decrypt. If you have a decryption error, then you can just use them to recover the secret eventually. So how can you prevent these kinds of attack? So shortly after this work, countermeasures started to be theorized and implemented, and they can be divided into 3 categories. The first one is to simply reduce the probability of decryption failure. The second one is to add more noise. And the third one is to sanitize the output. But additionally, we have to recall the vector of attack of IND-CPAD only applies if you share the decryption results, and not all application requires to do that. For example, if you have 2-party machine learning inference, one party will encrypt their secret data, send to a server which will do the inference, and then get back their results, and they only them have access to the results. So the first one was to reduce the probability of decryption error. So when considering bootstrapping, which is the only way we know to have truly fully homomorphic encryption, this is applicable to both exact and approximate schemes. And the idea is very simple, is you update the parameters so that the probability of error gets below a certain bound that renders the attack not possible. As an example, there was a paper that reduced the probability of error from 2 to the minus 15 to 2 to the minus 28 for bootstrapping. And you can relax it to Q-in-CPAD, but you say that as long as you don't make more than Q queries, then the probability of error is below an acceptable bound. Then you have noise flooding. The idea is simple, is you just add more noise to mask the noise that would be the threshold that we would get if you were to decrypt. It's very easy to implement, and it's probably secure because it's statistical security. But it's very hard to put in practice because if you want a reasonable security, you need to sample a noise that is so large that the parameters become impractical. There are some possible workarounds in specific situations, but in the grand realm of things, this is not a practical approach. And again, you can relax to Q-in-CPAD by choosing the standard deviation of the noise to be just large enough so that your security holds for Q queries. And finally, you have output sanitization. And here the idea is to ensure that the scheme is, even if it's approximate, is exact in a given context. So the context is you always have a specific circuit, and you will choose the parameter such that you ensure that at least when you evaluate the circuit homomorphically, when you decrypt, you have at least r bits of precision. And then you just truncate below this. So this can be applied to both discrete and continuous message, but it's much harder for continuous message because it requires a very precise noise estimation to avoid high loss of efficiency. And this is something that is difficult to do. And again, you can relax it to IND-CPA, and there is a recent work that proposes a very tight noise estimation for the CKK scheme that enables an instantiation of a scheme where you can ensure that with probability delta, you have at least R of significant bits that are correct when you decrypt. There was also some overtakes by the community, which was that all the previous attacks, they actually come from a misuse of the schemes. And what they introduced is a new security concept, what they'll call application-aware FHE. So, in this security model, they consider parameters that are only valid for a specific class of circuits. So the idea is that given parameters, a circuit and a ciphertext, the evaluator should only accept the evaluation if the circuit is inside the accepted circuit. And by this, we mean that the result would be precise enough, and you can single out the error and send it as your output. So application-aware FHE is strictly weaker than IND-CPA, but it renders all the previous attacks invalid. The only issue is that, again, it requires very tight noise estimation, and it's very difficult to instantiate for non-expert. So we've seen how we can make FHE scheme in CPD secure, but can we be more than in CPA this secure? And in theory, it seems difficult to achieve because we know that CCA2 is not possible because it's an impossibility result, and CCA1 would not enable bootstrapping because you would, the adversary would be able to decrypt the bootstrapping key and get the key. And we don't know how to construct an FHE scheme without bootstrapping. So the question is, can we do something about it? And are there other attacks that we not know about? So we have seen the IND-CPA security that enables the adversary to get encryption of messages already knows. And this was supposed to prevent attacks where the adversary would exploit the inherent decryption failure probability of the scheme. This year, it was shown that this is not even sufficient when the adversary can produce valid ciphertext with a public key. So a new security notion, which is strong CPA, was proposed, which is it gives access to the adversary an encryption oracle, and to which he can give some randomness. And the goal is to prevent attacks where the adversary would use a public key to produce a well-formed ciphertext, but with a bad randomness that would increase the decryption failure. Then we have a notion of func CPA. So this is kind of cryptic, but basically what they do is they show that you can have a scheme that is probably CPA secure, but where when a server interacts with the client to have, for example, as a client to decrypt, apply some function, re-encrypt, and send the result back, you can show that it's possible to have to lag the inputs. So you don't ensure input privacy anymore. And finally, we have also CCVA, which is Trojan Ciphertext Validity Attacks. So here, it's like CCA security, except the Oracle, they don't return the message, they just return a bit, which says, was the decryption correct or not? Did you have a decryption error? And this can be used again to, as we have seen, simple decryption error can be used to recover the secret key by binary search. So this model was supposed to prevent attacks where simply knowing if the ciphertext is valid or not would allow you to eventually recover the secret key. So these are all models that do not really prevent, again, active adversary. And if you want something to be usable in practice, we want to protect against active adversary. So can we do something that is stronger than CCA1? So CCA2, it formally states that given encryption of two messages, learning the decryption of one of them, you should leak nothing about the other one. But we know that CCA2 is not achievable for FHE, but what if it can be relaxed? So there is a very recent work that proposed a new model which is verifiable CCA. So the idea is that it's like CCA2, but the decryption oracle, it only accepts ciphertext which can be traced back to validated encryption. And So the oracle knows how the ciphertexts were obtained. So the idea is that ciphertexts are encrypted and signed, and every time you do a homomorphic operation, then you have some snark that would prove that the homomorphic operation was previously obtained from valid ciphertext. So this model, it protects against all known attacks against FHE, and the strong thing about it is that it also enables FHE via bootstrapping. So it's also CCA1 secure. In another way, it prevents R from being able to decrypt the bootstrapping keys. The only issue is that it's achieved with snarks to prove the relation between the ciphertext, and this is not yet practical. Basically, what we do is lose 15 years of pre-performance inefficiency. And so here's a diagram about what are the current state of the research. So we have VCCA, which is just below CCA2, and that would prevent all the other attacks. Of course, all the references are in the slide, and you will have the slides. So as conclusion, we've seen that FHE, it introduces many new scenarios and construction where the standard security assumptions, they are totally break in practice. So when using FHE, we must be aware of these issues. We've seen that passively secure FHE is achievable efficiently, but it requires modification to existing schemes. And actively secure FHE with bootstrapping is possible in theory, but it's not practical yet. So, voilà.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Jean-Philippe. Any question? We have plenty of time for question. Q&A. Anybody like to ask? Nothing? Yes, Ria.
Thanks for the talk. I was wondering what snarks schemes are being used currently in terms of instantiation, and do you have a sense whether some other type of ways of building snarks may be more efficient for...
So I'm not a snark expert, but what I can tell you is that the authors of this paper, they said it needs very specific snark with specific condition that are not usual, but that they exist. That we need not elaborate more on it.
Thanks.
I can also give like an example of the efficiency. There was a paper that tried to prove the bootstrapping operation of a scheme with snarks, and it was possible. They used recursive snarks. And instead of taking a few milliseconds, it took 40 minutes.
Another question? Anyone? So thanks a lot again. And if the next speaker is already here, so we can continue.